With Rishi Sunak. He was on a visit to a brewery in central London, which some might think is slightly odd for a teetotal Chancellor, but you may have noticed that one or two taxes changed on beer and wine. Now, I started by asking him why, with all those additional tax revenues he's receiving thanks to faster-than-expected growth, he's not, as a Tory, reducing the tax burden, having raised it to record levels.
Well, Robert, you're right. One of the big stories from today was the fact that our economic recovery is proceeding far better than people feared, with many more people in work than we had thought and the economy recovering far quicker. But that didn't happen by accident. That happened because we put in place a plan for jobs a year ago, and that plan has worked. And it's because of that plan that I was able today to support public services, invest in our future growth, and ease the cost of living for our lowest paid families in the country.
But when it comes to taxes, I mean, you ended your budget speech by saying you're a tax-cutting Conservative, but you haven't done it, so why not now?
Well, we did start cutting taxes today for the lowest paid in our society by changing something called the universal credit taper rate, which is a tax rate on work. And we wanted to make sure that we reward work, we reward effort, and provide that support to families right now. And that will come into effect in just a few weeks' time. And it is a significant tax cut for millions of the lowest paid families in our country.
Well, it's an effective tax cut. It's actually a benefit payment. But as you say, you are reducing the rate at which you withdraw it from people. Now, you've identified this cost of living crisis that many people are feeling directly. But you've chosen to help people in work. Now, there are lots of people who are not in work for no fault of their own. Why aren't you helping those?
Well, we have put in place support to help everyone, actually, who's vulnerable through the winter period. Last month we announced...
Your universal credit change only affects people in work.
We've already announced before today's budget £500 million in something called the Household Support Fund that will provide £100 or £150 for millions of the most vulnerable families across the country to help them with some of those bills over the winter period. We already took that decision a month ago to provide that reassurance and certainty for families. We went further today because work is important to me. I've always talked as a Chancellor about the importance of supporting people into well-paid work. And today, with the national living wage going up and indeed the tax cut for those in the lowest paid work, that will substantively help. It will reward their efforts, incentivize people to get into work. And it's all part of our plan for jobs. And as we've seen over the last year, that plan is working.
Now, in trying to understand your values, in a sense, who you are as a politician, I was struck that at the Conservative Party conference, you said explicitly it would be wrong to borrow to fund benefit payments. But that's exactly what you've done today with your universal credit reduction in the taper rate. You're borrowing now to pay for that.
Well, actually, today, what I put in place were some new fiscal rules, and they guide and discipline the government about things like borrowing and debt. And the fiscal rules we've put in place say our borrowing will reduce every year, our debt will be falling, and actually, the independent watchdog today said we will meet those fiscal rules. Our public finances have been enormously strengthened by the responsible actions
3 years' time,
I've done.
Today, we've still got a big deficit today. So right now, you are borrowing to fund that universal credit payment.
Yes, we've been hit by the biggest economic shock in 300 years, and we responded with an unprecedented set of actions to help the country get through it. Of course, we don't recover from something like that overnight, but what we have done is put in place the measures that mean over time, our borrowing comes down, our debt will start reducing again. And that's important because, as we're seeing, there's uncertainty in the global economy. Part of my job is to build the resilience, the protection we need against those future shocks. And that's what the fiscal policy today is doing. We are responsible with people's money, and we want to have a strong set of public finances. That's what this budget delivers.
Now, next week, the UK is hosting a conference that, you know, future historians may see as one of the most important conferences, in a sense, the world has seen for years and years and years. It's all about coping with climate change. So, now, we've got a Prime Minister who is passionately committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So why, again, today did you freeze fuel duty, which, of course, you know, actually makes it cheaper for people to drive greenhouse gas emitting vehicles? And why have you reduced duty for airline travellers? Again, many people would say that is not climate friendly.
Well, just earlier in this interview, Robert, you were asking me about what we're doing to help people with the cost of living. And that is the simple reason why we're freezing fuel duty. Whether it's people, families, or indeed small businesses, the cost of fuel is important. Fuel is now at an 8-year high. And I didn't think it was right in the face of that to increase fuel duty.
But
if I could just finish, because you make a fair point about climate change. Last week, we outlined our net zero strategy with tens of billions of pounds of investment. And to just pick on some of the things we're doing, we are funding the rollout of electric vehicle charging stations across the country. We're working with automotive manufacturers to create gigafactories to produce batteries here in the UK. And we're creating 2 plants in the UK to produce sustainable aviation fuel. So we are taking action to mitigate climate emissions in those 2 areas. But in the short term, I want to protect people from rises in fuel duty because I want to help them with the cost of living. And I think that's the right thing to do.
Now, there is a charge often levelled at you and the Treasury that you believe the costs of greening our economy, of adapting to climate change, are too great. Is that a fair charge against you?
Well, last week, people would have seen this government outline a very comprehensive net zero strategy. And that plan was fully funded with tens of billions of pounds of investment. And it tackles all the areas that are important, whether that's future nuclear power, offshore wind, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, electric vehicles, as we've been talking about. People should feel very confident that we are fully backing that plan. And actually, the independent forecaster today in their report said, taken in the round, the government's actions do put us on a path to achieving our net zero ambitions, and this budget will strengthen that journey for us.
Now, we're sitting in the glorious surroundings of this very trendy bar in South London. Slightly famously, you're not a drinker, but you have today actually reduced the cost of beer, wine, £600 million in duty changes. That's a lot of money. Why is that a government priority at a time when, we're not rolling in money as a country?
No, and again, it goes back to what can we do as a government to help people with the cost of living at a time when people are concerned about it and they're seeing prices go up.
But what about drinkers like yourself?
Some of the most direct things we control are the duties on things like petrol and on alcohol, and that's why we made a decision today to freeze those duties. We also undertook a radical reform of our alcohol duties, which are a mess. Other people have described them as so. They don't support healthy drinking. They don't support modern trends in drinking. And now that we've left the EU, we can do lots of things differently. So whether it's going to be cheaper Prosecco, cheaper fruit ciders, encouraging low-strength beers, or cheaper Aperol, there's lots of things that we're doing today, which actually I think will benefit drinkers and support healthier drinking as well.
One of the really striking things that the Office for Budget Responsibility forecast today was that they expect inflation to be on average 4% over the next year. And let's be clear, when it comes to what's really having an impact on all of us, it is rising prices, really a serious cost of living issue. So when I sat down with Rishi, what I asked him about was how worried he was about inflation, but more importantly, given this extraordinary stimulus in the budget, well, big stimulus in the budget, whether he wasn't indeed making it more likely that we will get a rise in interest rates when the Bank of England announces whatever it's going to do tomorrow.
I deliberately wanted to explain to people what was going on and hopefully provide them with some reassurance. I explained that the vast majority of the inflationary pressures that we're seeing at the moment are caused by global challenges in supply chains as the economies reopen, but also in energy prices. And I also said it would be irresponsible of me to sit here and tell you or stand in Parliament earlier and say that I could just magically make these things disappear. They will be with us for some months, but where the government can do something about it, we are. So whether it's on HGV drivers today, I took further steps. We're going to invest in better lorry park facilities for drivers, which will help recruit more people into that profession. Or as we've been talking about, freeze things like fuel duty or alcohol duty. We will do what we can.
OK, but you accept that inflation is, it's higher than it's been since the 90s, and the pressures are still there. This budget outlined in this wonderful red report, which I always love reading, shows that we've got a £25 billion stimulus next year. We've got a Bank of England meeting on Thursday where they're going to be considering putting up interest rates. Haven't you, in a sense, reinforced the case for putting up interest rates? How worried are you that interest rates are going to go up on Thursday?
Well, obviously, interest rates are a decision for the Bank of England, and for people watching, I'd say you should be reassured because they have a very good track record in meeting our inflation targets, which are to have low and stable inflation. With regard to fiscal policy, which is my responsibility, we have invested in public services and our future growth, but we've done so mindful of inflationary pressures. And part of the reason that I talk about strong public finances, making sure we get our borrowing down and get our debt falling again, is because I want to protect us against future rises in interest rates, make sure we have a bit of a buffer to cope with those. And that's what this budget delivers.
I mean, on that point, the Office of Budget Responsibility says that a 1% increase in inflation and interest rates would lead just in year one to 17 to 18 billion pounds of costs to you.
That is absolutely right. And I've been talking about this for a long time. When people say to me, well, why is strong public finances so important? Why do you care about it? It's exactly for reasons like this, that I have to protect the country against those kinds of things, make sure that we have the resilience, the buffer we need to cope with things like rising interest rates or rising inflation. And that's what I've done in this budget. Start building up that protection. That's the right and responsible thing to do for the country.
But just on that issue, when you were, because these are really difficult judgments for chancellors, when you were thinking about, okay, we've made a commitment, we're going to restore public services, but we've got this inflationary pressure, how worried were you that the kind of stimulus that you're going to announce would indeed fuel those pressures and then force the Bank of England to put up interest rates?
Well, obviously, these are all the kinds of things that I have to take into account where I'm putting together a budget and trade these things off. And that's why we've done some things that we discussed earlier in the interview, where we can freeze alcohol duties, we can freeze fuel duties, we can cut the tax rate for those who are on the lowest pay. Those help people with the cost of living. They are doing our bit to do what we can to help on inflation. We're investing in lorry facilities to ease some of the pressures there. Those are the things that are within my control, and that's what we're delivering. So
2 or 3 issues that I also just want to cover. One is we're in a relatively small business. You have announced some changes to business rates. They are nowhere near as generous as what Labour is promising on business rates. How worried are you that Labour will outflank you when it comes to essentially wooing the small business community?
Well, it's easy to stand up and say you're just going to abolish tax rates, which raise £25 billion a year to fund local services without having any plan for what's going to come and replace them. I don't think that's credible. And if I said that, you would rightly take me to task. But what we have done is next year for businesses like this, whether it's pubs, restaurants, theatres, cinemas, everyone in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector, we are cutting their business rates by 50%, up to £110,000 each. So for 90% of businesses like this, they're going to see a 50% cut in their business rates next year. That's a tax cut worth £1.7 billion, and it is the largest single-year tax cut to business rates we've seen in 30 years. So that's what I'm doing to support small businesses like this.
Now, so 2 quick ones, looking to the future. One, on overseas aid, I just want to be absolutely clear. Are you giving a cast-iron commitment that if you meet your fiscal charter, you will 100% definitely restore overseas aid to 0.7%, which could happen before the end of the Parliament?
That's what I committed to doing in Parliament when we had the debate on overseas aid. I was very transparent with people. I said, when our fiscal situation improves, I want to move back to 0.7. Parliament agreed with that position, and I'm really pleased today the numbers showed that that is forecast to happen, and that this is...
But it's a forecast.
It's forecast to happen.
It's a forecast for the ODA as well as in a sense, for debt, as it were.
Yes.
The 2 things are absolutely
they are
linked.
They are absolutely linked, but we have, because we are forecast to meet it, we have put the money aside, and if all goes according to plan, we will get there in 2024.
And another prediction is about taxes at the end of the Parliament. How confident are you that before the election you'll be able to cut taxes?
That's what I want to do. I passionately believe in having people keep more of the fruits of their effort. A party, a government, a chancellor that wants to reward people's efforts in work and reward work and make work pay. And it's not just empty rhetoric. Today, I made a start on it by cutting taxes for those in the lowest paid jobs. And that should give you some sense of my intent to deliver on that promise.
And something the Prime Minister isn't as committed as you on that.
We're both committed to it. The Prime Minister and I want to deliver that for people. And that's why we did it today. We cut taxes for those in the lowest pay to help them right now. And we want to lower the burden of taxation. As I said in my speech, I want to see taxes going down by the end of the Parliament, not going up.
Chancellor, many thanks.
Thank you, Robert.
So don't go away, because I'll be talking to Ken Clarke and Ed Balls about all of this. And we've also got an interview with Rishi Sunak's opposite number, Rachel Reeves. I'll be putting quite a lot of that to her. So join us back in just a couple of minutes for this budget special.
Hello, welcome to